No, Meghan is not invited to my upcoming Santa Barbara event. I have no involvement with the Epstein matter. Prince Andrew and Meghan do. She made an advance toward me. I did not respond.
On a quiet stretch of the California coast, something shifted behind closed gates at Kevin Costner's private estate. The decision was subtle, almost invisible, yet its impact rippled straight through Meghan Markle's carefully built world. Within hours, whispers turned into tension, and tension into shock, leaving Prince Harry visibly unsettled. Was this driven by private knowledge, shifting alliances, or something far more calculated? What followed wasn't just distance. It was a moment that threatened to redefine everything they thought was secure. Do you think Costner's decision was justified, or is there more beneath the surface? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe to uncover the truth behind stories like this. When silence became a statement, it did not begin with an announcement or a public rejection. There was no headline at first, no official statement, no visible confrontation. Instead, it started with something far quieter, a moment that passed almost unnoticed, yet carried a weight that would soon ripple far beyond the room. Kevin Costner, a man known for choosing his own path regardless of pressure, made it clear in his own way that he was not willing to be part of something he did not fully believe in. He was not going to be in that mix. That choice, simple on the surface, held a deeper meaning once placed against the backdrop of what had been unfolding around Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. After stepping away from royal life, they had arrived in California with a clear objective: to build influence, to establish credibility, and to secure a place within Hollywood's most selective circles. The transition had not been subtle. It was deliberate, structured, and carefully managed. Appearances were calculated, partnerships were pursued. Every move suggested momentum. For a time, it seemed to be working. Meghan appeared to move with precision, aligning herself with the right events, platforms, and people. Harry, navigating a life far removed from royal duty, began shaping a new identity built around global influence and humanitarian relevance. Together, they represented something rare, a blend of royal recognition and Hollywood ambition that few had ever attempted at that scale. And yet, in the middle of that ascent, Costner's decision introduced something unexpected. Not resistance in the traditional sense, but distance. A pause, a quiet step back that did not need explanation to be understood. This was not a figure known for reacting impulsively. Across decades in the industry, Costner had built a reputation on independence, often refusing to follow trends or expectations placed upon him. He had invested in his own projects, taken risks others avoided, and maintained a level of control that few in Hollywood could sustain. When he made a move, it was rarely accidental. That was what made this moment different. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public disagreements, no direct criticisms. Instead, there was an absence, a subtle shift in alignment that suggested a decision had already been made behind closed doors. Those who observed closely began to recognize it for what it was: not noise, not speculation, but a boundary. And boundaries, when set by someone like Costner, tend to signal more than personal preference. They reflect judgment, they reflect awareness. And in an environment where perception often shapes reality, even a quiet decision can carry consequences that extend far beyond its origin. For Harry, the effect was difficult to ignore. For Meghan, the timing could not have been more critical. What had once appeared to be a steady integration into Hollywood's inner circles now faced an unexpected complication. One that did not arrive loudly, but settled in slowly, altering the atmosphere in ways that would soon become impossible to overlook. When Kevin Costner sets a boundary, it rarely stands alone. It signals something deeper. But what did he see that others didn't? And why did it quietly disrupt Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at such a critical moment? Stay tuned, where access was given and quietly rewritten. What followed did not unfold in public statements or interviews. It revealed itself in a setting that had always operated on something far more subtle than headlines. Along the coastline of Carpinteria, on a stretch of oceanfront land owned by Kevin Costner since 1988, an event took place each year that
Kevin has had the property in Carpinteria, a seaside town in southeastern Santa Barbara, since 1988.
carried a meaning few outside that circle fully understood. The gathering was known as 1805 Live. On the surface, it was a charity event created to support first responders in Santa Barbara County after the devastating mudslides of January 2018 that claimed 23 lives. But over time, it became something more. It was not simply about music, fundraising, or recognition. It evolved into a quiet signal of belonging. Those who attended were not just invited, they were trusted. The estate itself reflected that idea, 10 acres of private land overlooking the Pacific.
Kevin Costner's Summerland property, 10.25-acre parcel overlooking the Pacific Ocean.
A stretch of coastline that felt removed from the rest of the world. Every detail suggested control, intention, and careful selection. Costner did not just host the event, he shaped it. The people who appeared there, from performers to guests, were not random, they were chosen. When Meghan Markle stepped onto that stage in 2023 to present Costner with the Heart of the Community Award, the moment carried more weight than it appeared. It was not just a gesture of appreciation, it was recognition, a visible sign that she and Prince Harry had found a place within a space that did not open easily. From the outside, it looked like a turning point, their presence aligned with figures who had long been part of that world. The atmosphere was warm, the reception was positive. It suggested that the transition from royal life to Hollywood influence had reached a new level of acceptance. Then, a year later, something shifted. In September 2024, when the event returned, Harry arrived again, but this time he arrived alone. Meghan was absent, reportedly due to illness. On its own, that explanation seemed simple enough. Events are missed, circumstances change. But within that environment, where presence itself carried meaning, absence began to take on a different weight. Those who were there noticed it, not through anything spoken directly, but through the subtle changes that defined the evening. The atmosphere felt different. There was a distance that could not be easily explained. It was not dramatic or obvious, but it was there, lingering in the background of conversations and interactions. Nothing had been announced, no statements had been made, yet the contrast between 2023 and 2024 was impossible to ignore. One moment had suggested inclusion, the next hinted at separation. Inside a space built on careful selection, even the smallest change in who stood within it could signal something larger. And in a place where access was never accidental, the difference between being present and being absent could quietly redefine everything that came before. Nothing was said, yet everything changed between 2023 and 2024. How does someone go from welcomed presence to quiet absence in a world where access is controlled? Was this a simple coincidence, or the first sign of a deeper shift no one was meant to notice? Keep watching. When a quiet rumor carried unusual weight, the shift that had been felt at the 2024 gathering did not remain contained within that evening. It moved outward, slowly at first, then with growing intensity. Conversations that began in private settings found their way into wider circles, and soon acclaim began to circulate across social platforms, industry discussions, and online commentary. It was not presented as an official statement. It arrived as something far more uncertain, yet strangely powerful. According to those circulating accounts, Kevin Costner had made a remark that suggested distance between himself and Meghan Markle. The claim went further, implying that she might no longer be welcome at future gatherings held at his estate. There was no recording, no direct confirmation, nothing that could be formally verified. And yet, unlike many rumors that fade quickly, this one did not disappear. It held attention. Part of that attention came from the nature of the claim itself, but a larger part came from the man at the center of it. Costner was not known for careless words or impulsive decisions. Over decades in Hollywood, he had built a reputation that stood apart from the usual patterns of the industry. He had taken risks others avoided. He had invested heavily in his own projects, including financing tens of millions of dollars from his personal resources into his film Horizon, an American saga.
I'll have to ride down there and see. I'd like to see how they're working too, if it is them.
That decision alone reflected a level of independence that few were willing to match. More importantly, he had made it clear, repeatedly, that he did not operate under external pressure. In interviews, he spoke openly about telling the stories he believed in without adjusting them to fit expectations. He did not position himself to please studios, audiences, or trends. He moved according to his own judgment. That was why the rumor carried a different kind of weight. In an industry where words are often shaped for effect, Costner had spent years demonstrating that he did not follow that pattern. If he chose to distance himself from someone or something, observers believed it would not be random. It would come from a place of consideration, from a decision already made long before it became visible. The claim itself remained unverified. There was no direct evidence to confirm that such a statement had ever been made, but the reaction to it revealed something important. People did not dismiss it outright. Instead, they examined it, questioned it, and in many cases accepted the possibility that it aligned with what they understood about Costner's character. Within that environment, the idea of distance began to take on a life of its own. It was no longer just about whether the words had been spoken. It became about what those words represented, a shift in alignment, a change in perception, a decision that, if true, suggested something deeper had already been recognized behind the scenes. And in a world where influence often depends on perception as much as reality, even an unconfirmed remark, when tied to someone like Costner, could reshape how an entire situation was viewed moving forward. What if the real story was never the words themselves, but the silence behind them? As Kevin Costner stepped back, did he recognize something others missed or quietly confirm a shift already unfolding beneath the surface? Stay glued. The authority behind the silence. The reason the rumor refused to fade was not simply because it was controversial. It was because of who it was attached to. Kevin Costner was not a figure shaped by industry expectations or guided by the usual need for approval. Over the course of a career that stretched across decades, he had built something far more difficult to maintain in Hollywood, a reputation rooted in control, instinct, and a willingness to stand alone when necessary. His path had never followed the usual pattern. While many relied on studios, executive backing, and carefully managed alliances, Costner repeatedly chose a different approach. He backed his own ideas, even when they came with significant risk and uncertainty. That was most visible in his decision to personally finance large portions of Horizon, an American saga,
Kevin Costner is embarking on a completely different project, Horizon.
committing tens of millions of dollars of his own money and even mortgaging property to keep the project moving forward. This was not a symbolic gesture meant to impress the industry. It was a clear reflection of how he operated. He trusted his judgment more than the system around him, and he was willing to carry the consequences of that belief. In interviews, he made that position unmistakable. He spoke openly about telling stories on his own terms and avoiding the pressure to reshape his vision just to meet expectations. He did not present himself as someone trying to fit into Hollywood's structure. Instead, he positioned himself as someone who had already stepped outside of it. That independence became part of how he was understood. When Costner made a decision, it was rarely seen as spontaneous. It was assumed to be the result of careful thought, something formed long before it became visible to others. This was what gave weight to even the possibility of his distancing himself from Meghan Markle. In an environment where public image, partnerships, and perception often drive success, Costner's approach stood in clear contrast. The Sussex presence in Hollywood had been built around visibility, strategic positioning, and carefully managed narratives. Their moves were often interpreted through the lens of influence, expansion, and audience engagement. Costner operated on a different level entirely. His decisions appeared to come from internal conviction rather than external alignment. He did not depend on maintaining approval across the industry or securing constant validation. Instead, he focused on maintaining control over his own direction, even if that meant stepping away from widely accepted paths. That contrast made the situation more striking. It was not simply a matter of two sides drifting apart. It reflected a deeper difference in philosophy. One approach was built on connection, collaboration, and growth within the system. The other was built on independence, selectivity, and the ability to walk away without hesitation. Within that context, even an unconfirmed shift carried meaning. Observers did not dismiss it as a misunderstanding or temporary distance. They saw it as consistent with the pattern Costner had demonstrated for years. If distance had been created, it was believed to come from a place of clarity, not impulse. And once that belief took hold, the conversation began to evolve. It moved beyond whether the words had been spoken and focused instead on what could have led to such a decision. Attention shifted toward the underlying dynamics, the pressures, and the quiet signals that often reveal more than any public statement ever could. A quiet shift, never confirmed, yet impossible to ignore. When Kevin Costner steps back, people assume purpose, not coincidence. So what triggered it, and what unseen truth turned silence into suspicion, shaping everything behind closed doors? Stay tuned. When association became the story. As the discussion around distance continued to grow, another layer began to form, one that carried far more serious implications than anything that had come before. What had started as a quiet shift in alignment now found itself intersecting with a name that already carried immense weight across both Hollywood and the British establishment. The moment that connection appeared, the tone of the conversation changed completely. Among the claims circulating in late 2024 and into 2025 was a suggestion that Meghan Markle had been mentioned in relation to the wider controversy surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. The implication alone was enough to trigger a strong reaction. Epstein's history had already caused one of the most damaging crises the modern royal family had faced, particularly through its connection to Prince Andrew.
As it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people.
Any suggestion of overlap, no matter how indirect, immediately carried serious consequences. Yet when the details were examined more closely, the picture looked very different from the way it was being presented online. When documents connected to Epstein were released by the United States Department of Justice in late 2025, Meghan's name appeared only once. That reference was not tied to any meeting, event, or personal connection. It appeared within an email exchange from March 2020 that simply referenced a news article discussing comments made by Prince Harry about Andrew's relationship with Epstein. There was no evidence of direct involvement beyond that mention. At the same time, a photograph that began circulating widely was presented as visual proof of a connection. The image claimed to show Meghan alongside one of Epstein's known associates on a boat. The claim spread quickly, gaining traction across multiple platforms. However, in February 2026, fact-checkers investigated the image and reached a clear conclusion. The woman in the photograph was not connected to Epstein. She was identified as a blogger who had been tagged in the original Instagram post from August 10, 2016. The image itself had no link to Epstein or his network. Despite these clarifications, the narrative did not fully retreat. This was where the situation took on a different kind of momentum. Facts existed. They were documented and publicly available. Yet the spread of the claims did not rely on evidence alone. It moved through repetition, suggestion, and the emotional weight attached to Epstein's name. In an environment already shaped by uncertainty, even a weak or indirect association could create lasting doubt. That was where the earlier discussion surrounding Kevin Costner began to intersect with this new layer. His alleged distancing, whether confirmed or not, appeared to reinforce a growing perception. It did not create the doubt, but it seemed to validate it in the eyes of many observers. What had once been separate conversations started to merge. Questions about industry acceptance blended with broader concerns about reputation. The focus shifted from individual events to a larger pattern that people were trying to understand. And in that environment, where perception often moved faster than verification, the presence of even a single unproven link was enough to reshape how the entire situation was being viewed moving forward. It did not need confirmation to take hold. It only needed attention, repetition, and the right level of uncertainty. As conversations spread, assumptions began to harden into belief, and doubt quietly replaced clarity, influencing how every new development was interpreted and understood. Separate stories began colliding, turning quiet doubts into a larger, unsettling pattern no one could fully explain. As perception raced ahead of proof, a single unverified link started reshaping everything. But was this coincidence? Or had the truth been quietly forming long before anyone noticed? Let's find out. Before the shift was seen, the ground had already moved. By the time the conversation around distance and association began to take hold, something else had already been unfolding beneath the surface. The environment that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had entered in 2020 was no longer the same. What had once appeared to be momentum was starting to show signs of strain, and those signs were becoming harder to ignore. In the early stages, the trajectory looked strong. Their partnership with Netflix, widely reported to be worth around $100 million, was built on a clear expectation. Their global recognition would translate into consistent, high-performing content. For a brief period, that expectation seemed justified. Their documentary series, released in December 2022, recorded more than 81 million viewing hours within its first 4 days, becoming the platform's most watched documentary debut. But the pattern did not continue. By 2024, new releases began to tell a different story. A polo-themed docuseries attracted such a limited audience that official viewing figures were not released. Meghan's lifestyle series, With Love, Meghan,
and you're in the kitchen playing and making mistakes and having fun together, and I think that's what I'm hoping translates.
saw modest engagement in its first season and a noticeable drop in its second. A holiday special released toward the end of 2025 was met with harsh criticism, with reviewers questioning both its tone and its appeal. The gap between expectation and outcome was becoming more visible. At the same time, their relationship with Spotify had already ended in 2023. The conclusion of that deal was not quiet. Public remarks from within the company drew attention, including comments from executive Bill Simmons, who openly criticized the partnership. The language used was strong enough to leave a lasting impression across the industry. Then came a deeper shift. In March 2026, reporting from Variety cited multiple internal sources describing the mood within Netflix in clear terms. The partnership, once positioned as a long-term collaboration, was being scaled back. The arrangement moved away from exclusivity, effectively reducing its scope and influence. Additional reports suggested that unsold inventory connected to Meghan's lifestyle brand had accumulated, further complicating the relationship. These developments were not isolated. Comments from other industry figures began to surface, including statements from talent agency leadership questioning the strength of Meghan's creative output. Reports also described internal challenges, including high staff turnover and difficulties in maintaining consistent direction. All of this had been building gradually. It did not begin with a single moment. It developed over time, shaped by results, expectations, and perception. By the time the discussion surrounding Kevin Costner entered the picture, the situation was already in motion. That was what made his alleged distancing feel different. It did not create the shift. It appeared to confirm it. What had once been viewed as potential was now being reassessed through a more critical lens. And as that reassessment continued, the narrative surrounding the Sussex presence in Hollywood began to change in ways that could no longer be easily reversed. A shift no one announced began rewriting everything in plain sight as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle moved in different directions. Was this a calculated evolution or the quiet unraveling of something already breaking? And who saw it first before the world did? Let's unravel the truth. A path quietly dividing in plain sight. As the pressure around perception and industry response continued to build, a different pattern began to emerge. One that did not rely on statements or explanations. It revealed itself through movement, through presence, and more noticeably, through absence. Prince Harry was still visible, still active, but the context around his appearances was beginning to change in a way that felt increasingly deliberate. From late 2024 onward, he was seen attending key events alone. The shift was subtle at first, easy to overlook if viewed in isolation, but as the pattern repeated, it became more difficult to ignore. When he returned to the 1805 event in September 2024, without Meghan Markle, it marked more than a simple absence. It aligned with a broader movement that was gradually taking shape. In February 2025, Harry traveled to Vancouver to host the 7th Invictus Games, an international sporting event he had founded to support wounded and injured veterans. The scale of the event reflected years of commitment. 534 competitors from 23 nations gathered to compete across 11 sports. The opening ceremony at BC Place drew an audience of approximately 40,000 people. Performances by artists such as Katy Perry and Chris Martin added to the atmosphere, but the focus remained on the athletes and the purpose behind the event. Harry stood at the center of it, delivering a closing speech that many described as deeply moving.
I would like to begin by honoring the First Nations who are hosting this year's Games.
In that setting, there was a clarity to his role that did not require explanation. It was direct, grounded, and connected to something that had defined him long before his move to California. A few months later, in July 2025, he traveled alone again, this time to Angola. The significance of that visit extended beyond the immediate moment. He walked through a region once marked by active landmines, the same area where his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, had drawn global attention in January 1997. Her walk had become one of the most recognized humanitarian images of that era, contributing to the momentum behind the Ottawa Mine Ban Treaty.
There's all sorts of places over the world where we were very lucky to have those moments with our mother, and very, very happy memories.
By the time Harry arrived, the land had been cleared, communities had been rebuilt. During his visit, he helped destroy 2 recovered anti-tank mines and spoke to local children about the importance of safety and a future free from hidden danger. As a father, he expressed concern for children still living near unexploded ordnance. The Halo Trust later described his involvement as deeply committed and meaningful. These moments carried a different tone from the Hollywood environment he had entered in 2020. They were less about visibility and more about purpose. Observers began to notice the contrast. In these humanitarian settings, he appeared more comfortable, more aligned with a role that felt natural rather than constructed. At the same time, the broader narrative around his life in California continued to grow more complicated. A distinction was forming, not through direct choice stated publicly, but through the direction of his actions. One path focused on global impact, service, and legacy. The other remained tied to media, branding, and industry expectations. Without needing to say it, the difference between those paths was becoming clearer with each step he took. As Prince Harry moved quietly between purpose and pressure, 2 realities began pulling him apart, one rooted in legacy, the other in image. Was this a calculated shift, or the silent unraveling of a path he could no longer sustain? When 2 worlds collided under pressure. As the direction of Prince Harry's path became clearer, the world he had stepped away from was facing its own strain, one that carried consequences far beyond public image. The British royal family was no longer operating under stable conditions. Instead, it was navigating a period of uncertainty that touched its leadership, its structure, and its long-term standing. In February 2024, King Charles III was diagnosed with cancer. The specific type was not disclosed, but the impact was immediate. Public engagements were reduced, and for a period of roughly 2 months, his duties were paused entirely. Although he later returned to work, palace officials continued to manage his schedule carefully through 2025, balancing visibility with the need to protect his health. By December 2025, a recorded message confirmed that his treatment had shown strong progress, described as an exceptional response, yet the situation remained delicate. At the same time, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had announced her own cancer diagnosis in March 2024 following abdominal surgery. She completed chemotherapy by September and entered remission in January 2025. Her return to public duties was gradual, reflecting the need for continued recovery. With both senior figures managing health challenges, the number of active working royals had been reduced to a level not seen in years. Into this already fragile environment came another crisis, one that reopened wounds the institution had struggled to contain. The situation surrounding Prince Andrew escalated sharply. After years of controversy linked to his association with Jeffrey Epstein,
Of saying to him that because he had been convicted, it was inappropriate for us to be seen together.
the consequences became more severe. In November 2025, he was formally stripped of titles and responsibilities. Then, in February 2026, on his 66th birthday, he was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, reportedly connected to the sharing of confidential trade information during his time as a UK trade envoy. This development carried historic weight. It marked the first time in nearly 4 centuries that a senior member of the royal family had faced such an arrest. The impact was immediate, forcing palace officials to revisit legal mechanisms that had remained dormant for generations. Among them was the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, a law originally created during the First World War to remove titles from individuals who had acted against national interests. For decades, it had remained largely symbolic. Now, it was being discussed again in practical terms. All of this unfolded while the narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan in California was already shifting. What had once been viewed as a separate chapter now began to overlap with the broader concerns facing the monarchy. Even indirect associations, even unverified claims, carried greater weight in this context. That was what made the timing so significant. As questions around Hollywood credibility grew, and as Kevin Costner was being drawn into the conversation, the royal institution itself was under pressure from multiple directions. The distance between these two worlds was no longer as clear as it once had been. In that moment, a quiet decision, or even the perception of one, did not remain isolated. It echoed across both spaces, amplifying tensions that were already present and bringing them into sharper focus at a time when stability was already in short supply. The reunion that could not rewrite the narrative. By the time September 2025 arrived, the tension that had been building across both Hollywood and the royal world had not disappeared. It had only settled beneath the surface, waiting for a moment where everything would appear steady again. That moment came when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back into the same space together. At the annual 1805 Live event, hosted once again at the oceanfront estate of Kevin Costner, their joint appearance immediately drew attention. It had been over 5 months since they had last been seen publicly as a pair. The setting felt familiar. The atmosphere, at least on the surface, appeared warm. Harry took the stage to present an award connected to the county fire department's mental health program, alongside the announcement of a $10 million endowment fund. High-profile guests were present. The images captured from the evening suggested unity, composure, and a return to form. From a distance, it looked like a reset, but beneath that carefully presented moment, the conditions surrounding them had not changed. The challenges that had developed over the previous year were still in place, shaping how that appearance was being interpreted. Their partnership with Netflix had already been restructured, moving away from the level of exclusivity it once held. Reports indicated that the relationship had lost momentum, with internal sentiment shifting toward closure rather than expansion. Meghan's lifestyle brand had also undergone a transition, losing Netflix as an equity partner in March 2026 and moving toward a more independent structure. Public response to their recent projects had not reversed direction. Reviews remained critical. Audience engagement had not returned to earlier levels. Within industry conversations, confidence in the long-term viability of their media strategy had begun to weaken. These were not isolated reactions. They formed a broader pattern that continued to influence perception. At the same time, the wider royal situation remained unresolved. Developments connected to Prince Andrew continued to draw attention back to the institution, keeping the environment tense and uncertain. Every new headline carried implications that extended beyond a single individual. In the middle of all this, the earlier discussion surrounding Costner had not disappeared. Whether the reported remarks had ever been made or not, his name had already become part of the narrative. That alone had altered how events were being viewed. It introduced a layer of interpretation that could not easily be removed. The significance of that shift was not tied to confirmation. It was tied to perception. In a space where influence often depends on how actions are understood, even an unverified association can change direction. Costner's reputation, built over decades of independence and careful decision-making, gave that association a weight that extended beyond a single moment. And as the evening at 1805 came to a close, what remained was not just the image of a reunion, but the quiet recognition that some changes, once set in motion, continue to shape the story long after the moment itself has passed. So, what do you think? Did Kevin Costner step back by instinct, or expose a truth Meghan Markle and Prince Harry couldn't hide? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.